Crossroads is funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the National Endowment for the Arts. There's a certain routine to the work of a migrant farm worker, and after years of picking vegetables under the hot sun, time and places seem to fuse together. But then along comes a law that can make the life of a farm worker even more difficult.
This person had no birth certificate. I've worked on marriage license, but there's no date of birth on that particular marriage license. They wasn't putting it on there at that time.
I'm Elizabeth Perez Luna. Today, harder times for old migrant farm workers. Also, Stanley Jordan's jazz guitar, a new black film encyclopedia, and more. Traditionally, life for a migrant farm worker means moving from state to state to follow the harvest trail. The idea is to travel as light as possible, get paid, and remember where and when to return next year. The 1986 immigration law has changed that by imposing a rigid system on the farm workers who now have to prove that they are legally allowed to work. As John Snyder reports from Immokalee, Florida, this has been particularly difficult for older farm workers.
If you want to find work in Immokalee, the pantry shelf parking lot's the place to be. It's here that the crew leaders come, looking for workers to pick tomatoes, cucumbers, or watermelon. All morning long, their converted school buses rumble off to the fields surrounding Immokalee. But these days, there are some workers who can't get on to those buses.
We've had 200-300 people from time to time that couldn't work any place.
Albert Lee is a paralegal with Florida Rural Legal Services in Immokalee.
From day to day, you have to get somebody to come in and says, I want to work, I can't work. What's going on? I used to could work, now I can't work. Why?
One of the people asking why is Herman, a black farm worker in his early 60s. He's worked in the fields all his life, and he's been coming to Immokalee for the last 10 years. Although he's thin and gaunt and a winter cold is aggravating his emphysema, he'd like to be picking tomatoes this afternoon. Instead, he's spending yet another day at Manzano's Flophouse, lying in a sagging bunk. In a voice muffled by a lack of teeth, Herman explains that this winter no one will hire him.
But see, since I've been down here now, I can't get out to get nothing to do. They won't carry out now unless you got a white card and all like that. And I hadn't got none there.
The white card that Herman refers to as a worker identification card issued by a local farmer co-op that you now need to work in Immokalee. Farmers are requiring the cards to avoid the employer sanctions provision of the 1986 immigration law that officially went into effect in November. It calls for heavy fines for employers caught hiring undocumented workers. To get a card, foreign workers must provide immigration documents. American workers must present a birth certificate, driver's license, or a Social Security card. The problem is, Herman doesn't have any of those documents. He lost them a while back. So he has nothing to prove he was born in Ohio or that he's even an American citizen.
Till very recently, nobody asked any questions when people got on the bus in the morning to go out to work.
But they do now, says Rob Williams, a lawyer with Florida Rural Legal Services, and it's complicated things for elderly farm workers.
Your typical elderly farm worker is a black American who was born 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago in the South. Quite frequently in rural areas, there weren't birth certificates. People weren't born in hospitals. They might have been born at home so that they never did have a birth certificate. And then also, up until 1975, very few agricultural employers even bothered deducting Social Security taxes for farm workers. So a farm worker didn't even need a Social Security card. And then they don't have credit cards. They don't have a bar card. They don't have a driver's license. So they are experiencing problems in getting a valid identification card.
Guadalupe Social Services in Immokalee is known mostly for its soup kitchen, which, as usual, is packed this afternoon. But social workers here are also helping locate documentation for elderly farm workers. Some are black, Some are Anglos and some are Hispanics, elderly Mexicans who crossed the border decades ago, unnoticed and unchallenged.
Yo pasé de la edad de 14 años a Estados Unidos.
77-year-old Aniceto is one of them. Tall and thin with a square jaw and a crop of thick graying hair, each day he comes to have lunch at the soup kitchen and talk with social worker Maria Marquez.
He came to the U.S. when he was 14. At that time, they used to have to pay 2 pennies to cross the border bridge from Mexico to the U.S. So he's been here that long.
But Aniceto has nothing to prove that. In fact, he has no documents to even prove he's Aniceto. Maria Marquez has been trying to track down those documents with no luck. And that spells trouble for Aniceto, who has an interview coming up with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. He's applying for amnesty under the Seasonal Farm Worker Program.
Ahora aquí dice que lleve documentos, yo de dónde los llevo, dice en ese papel.
Saying that when he goes for his interview, it says on the card to take any papers that he has with him. And usually they require the original birth certificate or baptismal certificate. But he says he doesn't have any papers to take with him, and that he just hopes that whenever he gets there that everything will be what they need.
Social workers in states throughout the country are seeing cases like Aniceto and Herman, but no one knows exactly how many. Some say the problems they're facing are inevitable, that they're just part of the stricter system made necessary by immigration reform. But Rob Williams says the Immigration and Naturalization Service is partly to blame.
The INS has made a big effort with employers to get them to implement systems. They did relatively little to inform employees and the public of what they needed to do in order to be able to work once the new law went into effect.
So, in Immokalee, many elderly farm workers remain jobless. In their hand-to-mouth existence, even a day or two without work is a crisis, and many haven't worked for weeks. Some search for a farmer who will take the risk to hire them. Many, like Herman, concentrate on finding documents and getting that white card.
Well, we keep a trying until I get it. That's all I know. That's all you can do. Don't never give up. You never give up. I will keep a trying until I get it.
A few weeks later, Herman did give up. He headed for Homestead. Maybe they don't require a white card there. For Crossroads, this is John Snyder in Immokalee, Florida.